We're on. I'm here at the Glenn Show at bloggingheads.tv. Glenn Loury of Brown University. I'm here with my friend, former student, if you'll let me say that. It's been 30 years, but...
Not quite, but it's been up there.
Yeah, 25 at least. And Blogging Heads conversation partner, Harold Pollack of the University of Chicago School of Social Service Administration. We are here in the aftermath of a tough week for the country. The president just spoke yesterday in Dallas at the funeral memorial service for the 5 slain police officers, days after the killings by police of 2 African-American unarmed men, Anton Sterling in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Philando Castile in suburban St. Paul, Minnesota. Much has been written and much has been said. You might ask, what can we add to that? I think that both of us, I don't want to speak for Harold, he's perfectly capable of speaking for himself, but I'm here introducing the program, have experienced in our interactions with friends and social media followers and activists with whom we're in our networks and with whom we're in contact, how difficult it is to talk at this moment about the problems that the country faces and how we might be able, effectively, profitably, as a people, I speak here of the American people, to go forward. It's such a partisan and polarized discussion. Many examples could be given. I learned recently of the former Miss Alabama who streamed herself on Facebook saying that she was ashamed of the fact that she couldn't feel real grief for the death. This is an African-American woman. Couldn't feel real grief for the slain police officers in Dallas and was thinking of Micah Xavier Johnson, the gentleman who has been identified as the shooter, as a martyr. This, of course, drove Sean Hannity crazy.
That would be a short putt. Continue.
He had her on the program and he harangued her and he would barely let her speak. And the thing that was remarkable to me about this, Harold, I'm sure you don't watch Sean Hannity. I do because it's a professional obligation. The thing that was remarkable about me is that she was absolutely even and cool. And she continued to talk even as he was ranting, saying what was her point. And her point was she felt profoundly guilty and riven by the fact that she didn't feel these things that she knew that she should feel. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I thought that was so telling about our moment. It wasn't that she had lost her moral compass.
Yeah.
Rather, being an African-American woman, seeing these events in the way that she was seeing them, she simply couldn't find it in herself to feel sorry for those police officers. And at some level, was thinking about this guy who did this horrific act as a martyr. I offer his one example. I'll offer another, and then I'll shut up because we want to have a conversation. Today, I log on, and I'm surfing, and I see my man, Ta-Nehisi Coates, your man. Actually, he's not my man. He's your man. But I see our friend Ta-Nehisi Coates at the Atlantic, and he's allowing as how, of course, it was horrific what happened in Dallas, but it was not entirely unexpected. It shouldn't come to us as a surprise. After all, he says, and I paraphrase here, people should go and look at what he says. If you have events like the ones that we have been experiencing over the last 5 years or so, Tamir Rice shot down a poor 12-year-old kid, Walter Scott shot in the back fleeing away from police officers, and he gives many examples.
Yeah.
You got to expect that the police are going to lose legitimacy, and when they lose legitimacy, they put themselves at risk. He makes an analogy with what is said about the potentially harmful effects of Donald Trump's anti-Muslim rhetoric. It makes America less safe because it alienates our allies. It makes America illegitimate in the eyes of Muslims around the world, and that, in fact, undermines our security. Likewise, he says, the wanton killing by police officers, by agents of the state of black people, which has been going on forever in America, delegitimizes the police, and that makes them less secure even as they try to go about their business in inner city communities, and so we shouldn't be entirely surprised. I will say for my part, Harold, and you can speak for yourself, I wasn't very happy with Ta-Nehisi's framing of it. I felt it was a little bit like Malcolm X saying chickens come home to roost after the Kennedy assassination. I had problems with it. On the other hand, just like this young woman whose name I don't recall, the former Miss Alabama, the fact that he was saying it, I had to take seriously. That is to say, I had to say, damn, Ta-Nehisi feels that way about it, does he? Reminds me of what he said in his book about not being able to feel any sympathy for the firefighters and police officers incinerated in the collapsing Twin Towers in 9/11 because he was mourning the death of his dear friend, Prince Jones, and he was pissed at the police and at the forces of authority in the country. Anyway, I'll stop. Okay. That's a long enough intro. Go ahead, Harold, please.
Yeah, by the way, I interpret that as being self-reflective, much in the way that the Miss Alabama was being self-reflective, in the sense of saying this was my gut reaction.
But what he didn't say that Miss Alabama did say is, I feel horrible about the fact that I feel this way.
Well, I think he's a skilled enough writer and aware enough of his audience to understand how that would be read, and his willingness to put that out there, knowing that the reader would read that from a place of great compassion and mourning towards those people, I think allows us to fill in those blanks in a more humane way.
So you're getting a kickback, are you?
Yes, exactly. So it's. I think, though, that, by the way, I think the real loss of police legitimacy, in my mind, is not the individual incidents, especially the incidents where someone horribly makes a split-second decision that results in someone's wrongful death. To me, what undermines police legitimacy is the lack of systemic response, and often the use of investigatory procedures that are designed to protect people who commit wrongdoing. To me, the saddest thing, as I've mentioned to you and I've mentioned on this program, I think, when I watched the video of the Laquan McDonald shooting, and all the officers except one are doing exactly the right thing. There's a lot of very humane policing in that video before McDonald is shot. Guy drives up, puts 16 shots into the kid, but all these officers who had actually been doing the right thing then circle the wagons and lie in one form or another to protect this individual, and seeing that on video so directly and being able to compare what they said with what happened, is devastating in a way that an individual, untrained, frightened officer killing someone in a tragedy, is a different thing. It's a more systemic thing. And I do think that it is a reality. Police loss of legitimacy is a reality, and it's a threat to the safety of officers. And when you combine that with, so it just seems to me that is a reality that we face. I want to pick up on some other things, but I do think that's just basic. That observation seems to me correct.
Well, just a quick one on the question of police loss of legitimacy. So, all right, messed up policing, unresponsive to people, unaccountable violation of people's rights by police officers that doesn't get properly dealt with, the circling the wagons, and all of that. These are causes, at least immediate proximate causes of the police loss of legitimacy. We could talk about deeper causes. Mm-hmm. What are the responsibilities to counteract the community's diminished legitimacy by members of the community who are themselves leaders, by intellectuals, newspaper journalists, politicians, mm-hmm. African-American politicians, who mm-hmm. might be in the position of stepping forward and saying, look, I understand how you feel, I know, and these are issues and we're working on them, darn it. We're going to get the laws changed to renegotiate the contract with the police union or mm-hmm. press to make sure that this or that misbehaving officer is dealt with. But I want you to understand that the police overall are not an illegitimate institution. They are overall not only a legitimate but an absolutely essential institution. We all depend upon them. Someone in New York City who's an African-American intellectual or politician might say, look at how the murder rate has gone down. I think we have to give the police some credit for that. I agree with you that there are racial profiling excesses and so forth, but that's not all of what policing is about. Might stand with Commissioner Bratton or whomever it might be, and might also call out the more extreme voices within the community who basically say, to paraphrase Heather McDonald, it's war on police now. I mean, there are those voices that are out there. And so what are the responsibilities, or do you think, if there are any, of African American, the young activists, the Black Lives Matter celebrities and so on, who have a national platform? Of course, they have the issues that they have, that they're interested in countering police violence against African Americans. But they're citizens of this republic. They have a long-term interest, not in poisoning the well, but in building a kind of platform of political cooperation across racial lines that allows for something to be done about the things that they're concerned about, but that also addresses other issues. And I'll stop, what about the fact that it's not only African Americans who are victimized by bad policing? There's a long list of white people, I mean, if we have to refer to their race, who've also been shot down under dubious circumstances, who's also lost their lives when police officers, for whatever reason, have killed them even though they were not armed. Maybe they're mentally ill. Maybe they're a kid on crystal meth out driving late at night somewhere or whatever. They're Americans. Bad policing has killed them too. So, again, I'll stop. I want to know what you think the responsibilities are of those of us who are outraged by police misdeeds to nevertheless affirm the basic legitimacy of the institution, which can it be discredited across the board because of the misdeeds of some of their members?
Well, I say a couple of things. I would say, I think there's a moral, a strategic, and a political dimension of this that are sort of all in there. I think that certainly police are an essential institution that must be made legitimate and that have an important role to do. And I think that, the young angry protesters are one constituency that is protesting the police. There are others. One of the things that I think is most sad is that police believe that Black Lives Matter protesters and many of the people that are protesting police, many police believe that people endorse hurting the police. And which is not, in fact, what people are saying. And I'll give you an example. I saw Al Sharpton give a sermon in Ferguson, Missouri, while he was there participating in demonstrations. And a good chunk of his sermon that he was giving was, there are people out there who are acting like thugs. And if you do that, you are not only discrediting this movement, but you are discrediting the entire tradition that we're here fighting for. And that is not at all what this is about. When I talk to many people that I know who are friends and colleagues in law enforcement, they believe that Al Sharpton in particular tells people to go out and hurt police, to do violence, things like that, which whatever one's critique of Al Sharpton might be, he's just not doing. And it is, there are many voices that are out there protesting police behavior. I was involved for a couple of months in a police accountability task force in Chicago on one of the working groups. And ironically, many of the recommendations that the elite of Chicago came up with were not that different from some of the policy recommendations that the Campaign Zero group, which is affiliated with Black Lives Matter in a sort of complicated political way that I can't fully unpack, it was surprising how much there was an overlap, where the protesters were saying, we want police to have better training in de-escalation. We want to have a different external review process. And you get behind closed doors with people that are real experts in urban policy, and they're saying, we need more training on de-escalation. We need a different process to deal with officers that have committed chronic instances of misconduct. There's more of an overlap than people understand. And it's polarized on both sides. There's the responsibility of Black Lives Matter folks and their allies to say, hey, we cannot be condoning messages that would endorse hurting police or engaging in violence. There's also the behavior of police union leaders who are inflaming the situation and who don't understand how their own statements and behavior is absolutely undermining police legitimacy as much as anything Black Lives Matter is doing. So I'll stop there so you can get the word in. But some thoughts that come to mind.
I'm happy to give you as much time as you need because I've been taking as much time as I wanted. But let me say this. If I were a blue-collar guy who was in the police force, had worked my way up to a sergeant or lieutenant or something, had 15 years under my belt, and, I drive home to my modest suburban redoubt after a long shift, and I turn on the TV and see Al Sharpton, likely thought in my mind would be race-hustling ambulance chaser. Every time there's something that happens, he doesn't wait for the facts to come in, whether it's Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown or Tamir Rice for that matter. He's on front of the cameras doing his shtick. The fact that he gave a sermon that was more or less humane, I'm glad to know that he has it in him, but it doesn't cancel out the fact that to call murder, take the Tamir Rice, the horrific, tragic thing. Cops pull up. Here's a kid with a toy gun. They've gotten a call from a citizen. They think somebody might be brandishing a weapon in the park. It's a kid playing with a toy gun. They jump out and they shoot the kid. Now, that's a lot of things, okay? It's very bad policing. It's perhaps actionable negligence, okay? Criminal negligence. Murder, it is not. It's not murder. They didn't go there with the intent to kill that kid. They're not just a bunch of Ku Klux Klansmen riding around looking for niggers to shoot on the street. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, notwithstanding your able representation of the decency and the balance in these movements that sometimes people on the other side, police officers, might not see, is there not a case to be made that the activists, and Sharpton would be prominent among them, are morally high-handed, are too quick to condemnation, repair to racial motives in every instant? Was it the race of the kid with the toy gun that caused the police officer to shoot him? Of course, we've got our theories, implicit bias. If it had been a white kid, who can live in the parallel universe where the kid is white under exactly the same circumstance? None of us are going to go there. So at some level, forbearance in the accusatory language, a withholding of judgment until facts are in, a kind of, I almost want to say benefit of the doubt. Police officers don't deserve the benefit of the doubt given the tough job that they're doing. I'm not saying not hold them accountable. I'm saying don't convict them peremptorily on the basis of, and it seems to me like folks like Sharpton are given to doing that. I could be wrong, but that's been my impression.
Well, let me respond in this way. Well, I think there's two things. One is I think it's important to separate the systemic grievances that people have with an indictment of specific human beings in murky circumstances. And very often, the right approach is to focus on the systemic issues and to let the criminal justice system adjudicate what happened in a murky situation, such as the Michael Brown case. That's very hard to do, obviously, especially when there's a dramatic, when there's dramatic footage of it. I think that's. There's certainly moments where forbearance is wise. But I think there's a broader point that I think is important, that both the Black Lives Matter folks and the advocates for police, people who turn to people like Heather McDonald and others might weigh more seriously, which is this is a moment that's very polarized. Black Lives Matter and its supporters have gained tremendous political leverage. Everyone in urban politics is surprised to some extent by how the cell phone videos have just completely transformed the politics. And it's a very polarized debate that at one point was totally dominated by police and their supporters. And now Black Lives Matter is much more political influence than it used to. But still, BLM and its friends will not decide this issue. The police will not decide this issue. There's this broad group of people who will decide the issue, black and white, all sorts of different constituencies who are the onlookers, who need the police, who admire the police, who respect the police, but who have seen with their own eyes example after example of police misconduct and who realize that something has to be done. And sort of both strategic savvy and humane empathy have to somehow be combined in order for us to have a political process that can really resolve these issues. And I think the BLM folks would be very well advised even if it's entirely for strategic reasons, to have a more inclusive message that reaches many people who don't entirely identify with them, but who are ready to listen to some extent. And the same with the police. Police have to acknowledge that there's some really deep reforms that just have to be done. In Chicago, we had a process where 409 complaints were brought, 407 were decided in favor of the officer. That is not a process that can continue. And so when I see, it's very polarized. And when you try to carve out some sort of a position that acknowledges the need to go across the boundaries, you are basically failing the identity vouching test that each side wants to apply. And we thought you were an ally, and it turns out that you were not. Or we thought you understood the daily experience of a cop on the street in a dangerous neighborhood, and now you're talking about you're using rhetoric that plays into the hands of the people who hate the police. And for those of us who are in neither camp, I think it's really important to carve out that middle ground, because that's really what's going to decide this thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about, this will seem unrelated, but it's not. The 4th of July came, and I took my flag out of the closet and I hung it in front of my house. Mm-hmm. It's my flag only because the blue-collar white guys who redid this old Victorian were patriots, and they flew the flag on the house while they were fixing it up, and then they just left it there. And I took it down because, of course, being a college professor, I'm ashamed of the flag. I mean, I don't want anybody – that's the only flag on the street, right? I mean, I didn't want anybody thinking I was flying a flag on my house. I put it in the closet. 4th of July came. I decided to take it out and hang it. By
the way, hang an LBC rainbow flag below it, and then you'll be okay.
Yeah, you're probably right. Okay. Except then the workers would come back and pull the boards up from the floor.
There's that.
No,
their kids are gay, so you're okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that. So I put something up on Facebook saying, with a picture of the flag. I said, "Man, I'm flying a flag on my house." Now, how does that come about? And I told the story. Do you know that I got vitriolic comments from purported friends of mine saying, "In the hood, we know what that flag stands for. That flag is a symbol of American fascism. We people descended from slaves have been whatever, for flying a darn flag." Okay, I mean. Jeez, I betrayed the cause of the people, the folk, African American. I mean, that struck me as kind of scarily, divisively, whatever.
But also, by the way, cedes the flag to the most conservative people that want to fly it. It seems to me that I should be able to fly the flag and be proud of the country that elected Barack Obama president.
Indeed.
And in fact, it has, it's too,
and be an opponent of the war in Iraq or whatever it might be, and be a Bernie Sanders voter.
I mean, that flag was the flag that the Union soldiers brought into battle, freeing the slaves.
Indeed.
I think that it is so. It is so poisonous that we don't know how to do this. Now, I must say that if I'm a young, angry activist, I think it's hard to do, to really, people. A lot of those folks, I got a very negative reaction because there was a statement released by one of the key BLM groups that identified the two men who were killed tragically by police, apparently without justification, and that sort of just very quickly noted the tragedy in Dallas. I thought very quickly noted the tragedy in Dallas and said certainly we are not identified with this, but I thought moved on pretty quickly, and it seemed defensive and tactical. And there was an opportunity. This is a movement that has hashtags say their names. They could have taken a moment to give the names of those Dallas police officers who, after all, were shot in eyeshot of BLM activists at a BLM event. And they could have taken a moment to say, we have all these grievances against police. We are actually very militant and angry, and we're going to be out there. We're going to block traffic. We're going to do all kinds of stuff. But we just want to take a moment to say, these 5 human beings, and here's their names, we are mourning them, as 5 more people killed by a political fanatic with a semi-automatic rifle in America. And there's no conflict between militants and that human empathy. And in fact, a creative political movement finds a way to combine those things in a way that in that moment they were not able to do. And this was, when I wrote this, this was considered highly insulting to the people when I tried to communicate that.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I must say I'm not surprised. And what I want to go on to say is, people say this is the new civil rights movement, and I'm given a little bit of pause by that, because the old civil rights movement was rooted in a Christian worldview, from which the absence of empathy that you just described could never have issued. I mean, the Martin Luther King, of course, he would be the iconic figure, but I'm talking about the breadth and depth of that movement had a moral foundation that would go back in African American church experience 100 years. And I don't mean this to sound like criticism. I don't mean it as criticism at all. I mean it as an observation. What's the foundation? What is the philosophical, theological, moral Weltanschauung other than anti-racism? I get anti-racism. I get that. We say Black Lives Matter. Indeed, they do. All lives matter, though I understand that people don't want me to say that. As a matter of fact, they do. And where that comes from, it doesn't have to be Christianity, though that would be a rather natural place to repair here in the United States for this group. But if you tell me it's Islam, if you tell me it's Buddhism, if you tell me that it's some other kind of ethical humanism, I'm prepared to listen. I'm not asking you to be a believer in any particular. I'm just saying the morality that you're asserting has to be grounded on something other than the claim that you don't want to be racially discriminated against, if you're going to be able to weather the storm, roll with the punches, and carry yourself in a way that even people who disagree with you will end up respecting you. I'm fearful, and I'll stop. I'm fearful that Donald Trump's characterization, BLM, is divisive. I don't know who came up with that. Okay, I don't know who in the Trump camp came. I heard him utter those phrases in his video and whatnot. I'm afraid it might stick. I mean, I think that's not a crazy thing for him to say. That's not like Mexicans are rapists. That's the kind of thing that I fear a plurality of Americans may come to agree with, and BLM will have handed them, the cards for that.
Well, let me make a couple of reactions to that. I do think that is a worry. Couple of things. One is the civil rights movement was, of course, a much messier and sprawling thing than we remember. And there was a lot of disorder. There were different voices. One of the things that empowered the more moderate voices was the awareness by everyone that the more militant voices were there. And, you can deal with Martin and you could deal with Malcolm. Was, there was an element of
Sure.
of that. And there's also one way to improve the thing about the civil rights movement that is different from BLM right now is that the civil rights movement involved a broad middle class constituency that was activated on behalf of some of the same issues that the young angry activists were fighting for. And the young angry activists got it going. It was divisive to do a sit-in at a lunch counter in 1960. I'm sure that there were a lot of Americans who were like, what is some working class guy at Woolworths who just wants to serve a guy a sandwich? Why are you making his life difficult because of this? And there at any given moment, there's always a militancy that goes past people's comfort zones that is valuable. But I think that needs to be leavened with a broad constituency. If elements of the African American and non-African American community who are concerned about police reform get involved and say, hey, we really want to reform these structures, and we are not the young, angry people who are going to be out there in front of the CPD headquarters pushing and shoving. We are. That's not us. We do this in a different way, but we are there doing it. That can suffuse that movement, with with a different set of values, with a sense that, hey, you know what, the incremental process of reform is actually working. And because one of the things that I think fuels the nihilism of some of the BLM constituencies is this idea that the wider society just doesn't care and will not get involved. In order for us to get people organized, we really have to do these dramatic things because people are just not persuadable in a more incremental way. So I think that the more those of us who say, hey, I don't believe in violence against police, but I do believe that we have to look at these collective bargaining agreements and actually show, hey, we're going to do this differently now. Then it's a lot easier to have that conversation within the movement to say, here's some potential allies. How are we good allies with them so that they are empowered? Because a lot of liberal politicians, including within the African American community, are nervous about precisely what you just said. They're like, we care a lot. We want to expand Medicaid. We want to deal with undocumented immigrants who need help. And we are worried that the political costs of some sort of an explosion connected to unrest over policing issues, will hurt us strategically, either with Donald Trump, God forbid, or just any number of other political issues that we have.
But of course, I know you agree with me. It's not only a strategic, it's also a moral issue. I mean, it'll hurt you strategically, yeah, but it's also wrong. I mean, the lack of empathy for the dead cops in Dallas is just wrong. This is Glenn Loury's opinion, but I think I can defend the position. Throwing bricks down on cops who are trying to clear your demonstrators off of I-94 in Minneapolis is wrong. You're throwing bricks down from a bridge onto cops? That's a part of our movement. That should be sanctioned immediately. I think that insisting upon the line between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, which is to say insisting that at the end of the day, quintessentially, this is a racial issue, is wrong. Like I said, twice as many cops, people are killed by cops who are white as who are black in this country. You start at home, but you don't stay there. You reach outward. I think saying their names as some of the ones who've been gunned down by black people wouldn't be a bad idea, but I know that that's probably a bridge too far for this movement. I'm not saying get into a black-on-black crime debate. I'm saying get into an affirmation of black life debate.
By the way, it's not a bridge too far for many of the individuals in that movement. As you and I, as I've said to you many times, I go to demonstrations against gang violence where they say put down the guns, the same people who are saying put down the guns are saying no justice, no peace 10 minutes later. And many of the staff members in violence prevention interventions are people involved in Black Lives Matters, things like that. I think that at the level of individual people, it's quite possible to do that. And I think if we demand, I want you to use the hashtag All Lives Matter. That's a whole different thing. Okay. But if I say I want you to, here's this thing where we're actually celebrating a particular human life, people are quite willing to go there. And I can't believe that. I think most of the people, it's not that people have no compassion for the officers. It's that they're saying, why are you looking at me to express compassion towards that officer? Why? I had nothing to do with his death. And there's that defensiveness that comes from, everybody's looking at us to suddenly be sad for these police officers.
That comes from a lack of moral maturity, I would say. Comes from a lack of a deep foundation of transcendent humanism. That's not just about whose ox is being gored or about protecting my people. I was going to ask you, some of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement and other people like Ta-Nehisi Coates who are influential in this general space. Do you see any of them? I'm really just asking, whom you admire as profoundly serious moral agents reflecting on the human condition and not merely people who have been more or less successful at a certain kind of agitation on behalf of their particular agenda.
I do, and
okay.
By the way, I would say before I answer that, let me go back though and say I think exactly the same thing needs to be applied to. I think the thing that I offended the other side was to say, you know what, police union leaders who are not young, angry people, who are actually middle-aged professional political operatives and police officers for whom this is their job, for which they are paid, they are absolutely polarizing the situation and not projecting human empathy either. And and I think that they need the standards that one wants to apply to BLM need to be applied across the board. And I see, when I look at my Facebook page and I see statements by various, FOP spokesmen in various places that are trying to sort of take refuge in this atrocity in Dallas to shift attention from the need for reform, I'm thinking exactly, I could give exactly the same speech that you just gave, flipping around the proper pronouns. The sense that if you're not a police officer, if you're on our side of the thin blue line, you understand things that nobody else understands, and that sort of retreat into that is very toxic, and it needs to be addressed. As far as answering your question, I mean, one thing is I won't embarrass Ta-Nehisi or speak for him, but I do admire him, and I've found him, not that he's we know each other and like each other, not that we are we don't check in with each other every morning for our agendas or anything. But I do find a humaneness in a lot of what he writes. There's an angry edge to that that doesn't, to my mind, conceal the humaneness. And when I think about the way he wrote about his relationship with his son, for example, in Between the World and Me, I find that very moving. And in my personal interactions with him, certainly, I've had the same experience. And many of the people that are, I certainly find that many of the staff members that I was telling you about who are doing things with young people in Chicago every day to reduce violence are just tremendous people. Sometimes people with very difficult backgrounds. So some of them have had issues, with police before, or and they're just tremendous. So I certainly think that there's a lot of people. Now, I think how people behave collectively as part of a movement. I think the other issue is the way that group solidarity can often dull our moral sensibilities on issues that are viewed as threatening the boundaries of that group, or as a way of demonstrating our inclusion in that group. For me to, if I'm talking to you over coffee, I can mourn the fact that this police officer was a newlywed and he was shot down, when put me in a group of people and suddenly the whole interaction is different because it's a public statement that just has a different meaning. And I think we have to, that's another toxic dimension of it.
Well,
sort of signaling, and you know more than anyone about sort of signaling games and political correctness.
I know a little bit about that, but I don't know Ta-Nehisi Coates at all. You do. I must tell you, just reading what I read this morning, it was a horrific act in Dallas, but it was to be expected. Maybe that's not a quote, but that's a paraphrase, because after all, if you use the police to physically dragoon and bludgeon African Americans for 2 centuries, you got to expect that at some point somebody's going to lash out. And I didn't exactly see a moral beacon in that piece. It left a very bad taste in my mouth.
I just don't read it that way. I read that I don't read in that anything that says I'm happy that this is the situation, that I would endorse somebody dropping a brick. I read that as saying this is the structural situation that we are.
No. What's missing is a condemnation of the deed. He uses the adjective horrific. Okay? What's missing is a straight-out condemnation of the racial motivation of the deed. The man says before he dies that he wanted to kill white people. Contemptible. There's no place for that in American discourse. That's what I missed.
And I guess I take it the way that I read it.
I'm not saying he endorses it. Yeah. I'm just saying he didn't condemn it.
And I guess the way that I read that is it goes without saying. It is so it did not leave a bad taste in my mouth. It is and I think he's saying, this is the predicament that we are in. And I think it is a difficult thing to say I am, at the same time to communicate, I am furious about a set of injustices that go back, that are as old as the Republic, that we need to address. And I mourn the individual people, in this case, white people who were killed in a hate crime, that is in a complicated way coming out of this history. And I think I think we also have a decision to make as a reader. How generously do I read what has not been stated on the page, and what kind of a statement do I take that non-statement to be? And I don't think, I'm not saying that I'm not condemning the way that you are reading it. And of course, those with whom we largely agree, we tend to think about differently in making those allowances, from those that we did tend not to agree with. When I read Heather McDonald, I often sometimes think, there's a sentence here that wasn't said that I would have liked to have seen, that speaks to the predicament of the low-income minority people who are dealing with police in difficult circumstances, and those where she talks about the fathers of. I was looking at her book, The War Against Cop, and there's some statements about how there are basically no fathers in the inner city and things like that. And I was thinking, boy, there's a missing paragraph there. And I think as a reader, there's no obvious way to fill that in that doesn't involve a set of judgments about who do I think this author is, what do I think their values are. And I think one of the things that was stinging to me, by the way, was when people read my thing and they filled in those paragraphs. And one person said to me on Facebook, she said, you obviously don't understand BLM. And I said, what should I be reading, or who should I be talking to? And she said, talk to a black person. And
come on, Harold.
That's done.
Harold, all black people are not alike. I mean, I've never had to talk with my sons. Okay, I don't live in fear of being beaten by police officers. If I get pulled over for a speeding ticket in Virginia or North Carolina, as I was last summer, I don't tremble in my seat thinking I'm going to be shot by a cop. All black people don't have the same sensibility. We haven't all had the same experience. But anyway, let me. Not,
I was.
I know you weren't. I'm on a tangent here. I apologize.
It is. I must say, by the way, I do get treated visibly differently by police. I do see that a lot because I go to all these low-income neighborhoods, and I have comical. My interactions with police are often comical. And by the way, I have gone.
What, they think you're in there trying to buy drugs or something like that?
What's funny is that's the initial suspicion, and then when I say I'm a professor, they're just like, "Oh," they don't even ask for any ID or anything. They just look at me and they're just like, "I got it." And,
one of those.
I'm like, don't you want to see some ID? Don't you? But I must say, but I've also put on the bulletproof vest and gone out with police while there was an officer that had 7 guys with their hands on the hood while he was watching them and his partner was operating the computer in the car. And these guys who were not sort of men, really intimidating guys, I saw the everyday bravery of the officers and the work that they were doing, and I saw the number of people that they didn't arrest who they could have arrested. Yeah. And I do think that it is, that is a part of it. These officers were Latino. By the way, one of the most interesting groups of people to talk to about all of these issues are minority officers who really live both sides of this, and who, by the way, are not a monolith themselves, but who are very angry about a lot of the internal policing issues, but who also, of course, have to go out in these communities. I mean, at one point, we went to a scene where there were shots fired into a car. The driver of the car took off. The passenger was sitting there. There was a crowd of people, and police are there, and they said, "So who were you riding with?" And he said, "I don't know. I never met him." And this guy, he's sitting in the passenger seat of the car, in this guy's car. And no one has seen anything in this fairly isolated street, and it was fairly obvious that several of the people standing there knew exactly what happened.
Sure.
And that's what, and so they have that, the police see that too. But anyway,
we got to wrap this up, Harold.
Yeah, I digress.
Yeah. You got the last word somehow. I don't know how that happened, but I'll make it up next time.
Tactical mistake
Thanks.
by you.
Thanks for coming on the show, Harold. I really appreciate it.